All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to demystify one of the most fundamental, yet honestly kind of fascinating challenges in industrial engineering, how we actually measure fluid levels inside heavy, dangerous industrial equipment. We're going to look at some absolutely brilliant mechanical evolutions that make this possible. If you're studying process control right now, or maybe heading into your first field rotation as a tech, mastering these concepts is going to be an absolute game changer for your exams.
Here is our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with inside the pressure vessel, then hit the displacement float concept, how floats work, enter the pneumatic balance, and finally, translating mechanics to air.
Okay, Section 1, inside the pressure vessel.
So picture this. You've got a massive chemical reactor. It's highly pressurized, it's boiling hot, and it is completely 100% sealed. You can't exactly just pop the lid off to take a peek and see how full it is, right? And you definitely can't just drop a dipstick in there. We have to get really creative to measure what we literally cannot see.
And what you're looking at here brilliantly illustrates the base solution, the variable capacitance differential pressure transducer. Inside this sensing element, you've got capacitor plates that detect the absolute tiniest shift in a flexible isolating diaphragm. I mean, when fluid pushes against that diaphragm, it moves a fraction of a millimeter. The capacitor plates pick up that minute change, which gives us a highly accurate reading without ever actually exposing our internal electronics to those harsh, corrosive chemicals.
What that diaphragm is actually doing is, well, it's basically solving a math equation for us. Hydrostatic pressure is essentially our cheat code here. By calculating the pressure difference between the bottom of the vessel, which we'll call pressure 1, and the top of the vessel, pressure 2, the math mathematically infers the exact liquid level. It's simple, it's super reliable, and it keeps the plant running safely.
Section 2. The displacement float concept.
Now, let's look at the stark contrast between these two approaches. When I say the word float, you probably instantly picture a beach ball bobbing up and down on the water. Actually, scratch that. Totally erase that from your mind. A standard float rides the liquid surface and moves up and down. But a displacement float, it is a completely different beast. It's heavier than the liquid, and it is largely stationary. As the liquid level rises, it doesn't bob up. Instead, its actual buoyancy changes.
To really grasp this, think about taking a heavy, completely sealed metal pipe and shoving it straight down into a swimming pool. You're holding it firmly in place, right? As you push it deeper, or let's say as the water level rises around it, you can physically feel the water pushing back harder against your hands. The pipe itself isn't moving, but that upward force is changing. That is exactly what is happening inside the industrial vessel.
Moving right along to Section 3, how displacement floats work.
You might vaguely remember Archimedes' principle from high school physics, but here it's not just a textbook definition, it is a vital, everyday industrial tool. A body immersed in a fluid experiences an upward buoyant force equal to the weight of the fluid it displaces. In our heavy, stationary displacer, we use this exact principle to measure the effective weight loss of our float as the liquid climbs up its sides.
Okay, here is the exact mechanical sequence you absolutely need to know. First off, the displacer is fixed in position. Second, the liquid level rises inside the tank, covering more of that heavy displacer. Third, because of Archimedes' principle, the displacer loses effective weight. It essentially feels lighter to whatever is holding it. And finally, a mechanical spring or a torque tube linkage connected right to the top of the displacer detects this tiny, tiny change in force.
Which brings us to Section 4. Enter the pneumatic balance.
So, let's dive into the climax of our mechanical evolution here. How do we automate all this data without using a single drop of electricity? We use a pneumatic balance system. Think of this as the brain of the analog operation. It acts as a translator. It takes that raw, tiny mechanical force from the displacer spring and translates it into a plant-wide communication system using nothing but compressed air. And this is absolutely crucial in hazardous environments where even a tiny electrical spark could cause a massive explosion. So, you're going to want to lock this specific industry standard number in your head for sure. 3 to 15 psig, or pounds per square inch gauge. Whether you're standing in a massive refinery in Texas or a high-tech chemical plant in Germany, this is the universal air pressure range used to talk to valves and controllers across the facility. Generally speaking, 3 psig means 0% level, and 15 psig means 100% full.
Section 5. Translating mechanics to air.
Now check out the sheer genius of the flapper and nozzle setup we've got here. You have a constant air supply coming in through a small restriction. That air just bleeds out of a tiny nozzle, but when our mechanical linkage moves a flapper, basically a little obstruction, closer to that nozzle, it blocks the air from escaping. This immediately creates back pressure behind the nozzle.
Let's string the whole shebang together into a perfect causal chain. This is gold for your exams, by the way. Step 1. The liquid level in the tank rises. Step 2. The stationary displacer loses effective weight. Step 3. The connected spring reacts and pulls the mechanical linkage. Step 4. That linkage moves a flapper closer to the pneumatic nozzle. And Step 5. Back pressure increases, sending out a beautifully proportional 3 to 15 psig signal all the way to the control room. It is a seamless chain of physics.
And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the pneumatic balance transmitter. See that tiny change in back pressure from the nozzle? It's not quite strong enough on its own, so we route it directly into a bellows system. The bellows essentially acts as a pneumatic amplifier, taking that tiny pressure change and giving it the real muscular volumetric force needed to blast that 3 to 15 psig signal hundreds of feet across the plant to operate heavy mechanisms. Ultimately, that air signal is going to hit a control valve, and engineers have to make a critical, high-stakes choice here. Do we use an air-to-close or an air-to-open valve? This choice is based purely on safety. If it's a cooling water valve for an exothermic reactor that could overheat, you definitely want an air-to-close valve. Why? Because if the plant loses instrument air, the mechanical spring forces the valve to fail in the open position, instantly flooding the reactor with cooling water and preventing a meltdown. On the flip side, if it's a toxic chemical feed, you absolutely want it to fail closed to trap the danger.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative question to think about. If the industrial plant suddenly loses all compressor power, what happens to your fully automated pneumatic level control system? Does the whole process spiral into a catastrophic meltdown? Or do those brilliant mechanical fail-safes take over and save the day? As you review these systems, always ask yourself exactly how your control valves are designed to fail. Thanks for joining this explainer. Keep studying those P&IDs and stay curious.